Welcome to today's lesson, and we're concluding all of our thinking about Easter and looking at the important people within the Easter narrative. Now, as we start, I've got a quick question for you. What is your happiest moment? Can you think of a time when you're most joyful, when the most exciting and happiest thing happened? Have a little think and chat to the people around you about your happiest time. There are so many things that we can call on, aren't there? But I wonder what it was that you talked about that was your truly most joyful thing. Now today we're going to be thinking about great joy and great happiness. But I wonder if you've ever seen the Disney Pixar movie called Inside Out. Now it's all about inside the brain of one character and how she has all different feelings inside of her, including anger and disgust. But there are also two very important characters in there, sadness and joy. And if you know the film, it's a great film, and I suggest that you go and watch the movie at some point. It's amazing. But it talks about how sadness and joy are linked together, how the greatest joy is felt after a time of sadness. And we're going to think about that as we unpick the Easter story. Now, we've been thinking about very key characters in our Easter narrative so far. We thought about Judas, the man who betrayed his friend. We thought about Peter, who denied even knowing Jesus, even though he'd said many times that he'd do anything for him. And we've also thought about the women. And today we're going to zoom in about one woman in particular. Her name is Mary Magdalene, which means that she came from Magdala. So we're going to listen out for her in this story and listen out for the moment where sadness turns into joy. Now, early on the morning of the third day, Mary and the other women got up. As light began to pierce the sky, they collected the oils and the spices that they needed to anoint Jesus' body, and they decided to travel down the road. Now, as they were travelling, they were desperate to get to Jesus. You see, Jesus had died. His body had been placed in a tomb and wrapped in cloths, but because it had happened on the Friday, it meant that no one could anoint his body, and it had to be done quickly because a Sabbath day was starting. And so the women grew closer and closer to the tomb. And as they were walking, they suddenly remembered the enormous rock that was covering the entrance. What on earth were they to do? But as they got close, they saw that the entrance was open, that the rock had been moved, and that the guards were lying like they were asleep at the feet of it. They didn't know what was happening, and they ran and looked. And inside the tomb, there was no body at all. In fact, there were the cloths that Jesus had been wearing just lying there, and yet Jesus was nowhere to be found. They ran back to the rest of the disciples and told them that the tomb was empty, that something had happened to Jesus' body. Well, Peter and John leapt up and ran towards the tomb with Mary Magdalene following. John got there first and looked as he peered round the door. The cloths were lying there. The face cloth was folded down at one end. But Jesus' body was not there, just as the women had said. Then Peter came in and ran straight into the tomb. It was empty, completely empty, apart from the cloths. They didn't know what was happening. And then Mary came. The men returned to the others, trying to work out what it was that was happening. But Mary stayed there, and as she looked inside the tomb, she saw two angels, one sitting at where Jesus' feet would have been, and the other where his head should have been laying. "Woman, why are you crying?" they said. "They've taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they've put him," she cried. And then a voice from behind spoke to her. It was Jesus, but Mary didn't realise. "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Mary thought it was the gardener and turned to him. "Please, if you've placed him somewhere else, please just tell me so that I can go to him," she wept. And then Jesus spoke. "Mary," he said. And with that, Mary realised that it was Jesus standing in front of her. "Teacher," she said, and she clung onto his feet. "You do not need to hold on to me," he said, "for I have not yet gone to the Father. But go and tell my disciples that I am going to my Father and your Father, and I will see them soon." And so Mary ran all the way back to the others and told them how she had seen Jesus alive. And they were filled with bewilderment at what they had heard. So we hear there how Mary went from absolutely being distraught and upset and saddened and weeping to joyfully exclaiming that she had seen the Lord. What a change! What sadness turning into joy! See, Jesus had told his friends many, many times that this was going to happen. He'd even said to them, "I'm going to die, and 3 days later I'm going to rise again." But the friends of Jesus just didn't understand all the time that he was with them. But it was only in this moment that they suddenly realised what it was that was going on. That Jesus had done the exact thing that he said he would. And they couldn't believe what they were seeing and hearing. What an incredible moment in the Easter story. And all of this narrative, from the moment of Palm Sunday all the way through to the Last Supper, the Garden of Gethsemane, the trial, the cross, the grave, and in the garden when Jesus rose again, this story is the king of stories for our Christian believers. It is so important because this story is what all Christians believe is true. They believe that Jesus did all these things and that everybody had a part to play in it. Now I wonder, who was the most important person in that story? Now obviously for Christians it's Jesus, but who else was an important part of what took place there? It's incredible to think of the different feelings and the different emotions that each and every person had. Imagine yourself being one of the disciples, maybe Judas or Peter or Mary, maybe Thomas or Andrew or John, maybe it's the other people who were there. Each person has a different view of what it was like for them. But everyone is included in the incredible joy of that story. And to Christians, that is so important. So much so that that story has been told and told and told from one generation to the next. So much so that we know of this story today. It was written down and it was explained. And so for Christians, the Easter story, the Easter narrative, is the key story to what Christians believe. And so we're going to think now about the whole Easter story, about all those characters that we've heard about, and what it must have been like for them. What it was that they saw, what it was that they felt, what it was that they did as part of the Easter story. And so we have learnt over the course of these weeks how Jesus' story of death and resurrection had so many key people, important characters that were part of it. And each person played their part. Each person was important. And to Christians, this story is a story that they like to tell and remember and rejoice and celebrate at Easter time. And so you might know of Easter eggs that are used at Easter time as well. Now eggs, you might know, life comes from eggs. We get chicks that come out of eggs, don't we? And so an egg represents new life. But when they were first made, if you've ever had a chocolate egg, you'll know that there's some sweeties or some chocolates inside. But when they were first made, they were completely empty. And that was because the egg represented the tomb, that empty tomb that Jesus was in. So when it was broken open, there'll be nothing inside, just like Mary found it when she went there on Easter Sunday morning. No Jesus inside the tomb. And so Easter eggs represent the joy of a new life of being close to God always, and the idea of an empty tomb. So I would love it for you to think about all the ways in which different people have played their part in the Easter story, as to why it's really important to Christians and what Christians believe happened because Jesus died and rose again. Diary extract. Write a diary extract from the point of view of one of the key characters in the Easter story. What did they see, hear and do? How did they feel? Write in the character's voice. Hot cross buns. Bake. Can you find a simple recipe and bake your own hot cross buns? As you make them, think about the story of Easter and who are the most important people. Adult supervision needed. Christmas versus Easter. Think. Which event do you think Christians believe is the most important? Christmas or Easter? Discuss and give your reasons.